Welcome back to our cyber threat workshops here at RiskIQ. We do have a lot of people here today, so we're going to allow a minute or so for people to pile in today as we're going to continue on with this back to school theme. We're going to look at knowing your allies. Last time we talked about knowing yourself. This is all this Sun Tzu Art of War stuff, Benjamin.
Correct.
And we have this paper that's out. It's called, the 5 critical areas or 5 tenets, I think. Is that how we're really talking about it, of security intelligence? And it's like, know yourself, know your allies, know your weaknesses, know your enemy, know your surroundings. And so just looking at how threat intelligence can be looked at through all those various lenses to give you a better picture of yourself, your allies, your enemy, your surroundings, and I missed one there. Your weaknesses there.
Right.
So, which is part of knowing yourself.
Right.
Yeah, you're looking at your attack surface and you're not looking at your vulnerabilities. I mean, what are you doing? Right. So, we'll give it a couple moments here, but we'll get started on knowing your allies. Today, we're going to look at third-party attack surfaces. What's it like to step into somebody else's attack surface? What is it like to see what threats that they may face? Does that then impinge on you? We're all entangled with each other when it comes to the internet space. So where are those potential entanglements problematic? Where could an attacker sneak through? Where could a particular vulnerability or weakness within a third party end up affecting you? And then which is much more than a checklist or a questionnaire, in vendor management, but more of a security play of looking at their real world attack surface in the moment that it exists. So we'll give it another second here, Benjamin, but any initial fun things that happened for you when we were putting all this?
Well, when we do this, we have to remember the data that we have is live data, and it's always trying to figure out a good use case that's different than what we did before, and to show a supply chain. It took me a while to kind of try to figure out like what would be the pieces, and we talked about this, Josh, like, hey, maybe we should add this one or that or this. And as we add those things, I was really impressed with the organizations that we chose for the attack surface. And it's like, it was refreshing to see. Usually we see it's a can of worms and it's bad. But the ones that I chose this week, they got their act together. They have a little bit of work to do, but pretty much it's really good. So that was nice to see. But there's still room for improvement. And so when we go through and we know your allies, as we dig in deep to those things, we're going to come across some things that might not be at the surface right away, but as you dig in and you look, there's some things that they need to update and change pretty soon.
Couldn't be more right.
Yeah.
And so with that, real quick, I guess, folks, a little thematic thing here. One of the things you'll notice is that it's kind of like Bert and Ernie. Benjamin and I literally do this. So we're going to do another workshop in 2 weeks. Between now and then, we're going to be on calls like this with one another because, we can't be in the same airspace. So we're going to literally be like hunting around for bad things on the internet so that we can put them together and then teach you what it is that we did. And we're also going to look this week at some ransomware, and in particular, ransomware for hire. One of the things that happens all the time, we take like a straw poll just to see who's in the room so we can understand how to connect things to you and your particulars. And ransomware is always a really high one. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about that too, on top of the third-party stuff, is looking at not just ransomware, but ransomware as a service that may not be directly stemming from a particular threat actor or threat group or a class of malware campaign, but it's actually obscured by the fact that it's a service being operated by somebody else on behalf of the ultimate adversary that's after you. So let's get into it, Benjamin.
Okay, let's do it. So I'm Benjamin Powell. I'm the Director of Technical Marketing here at RiskIQ. Background practitioner, worked in IT for over 15 years, and then 15 years on startups, working at companies actually implementing systems and developing systems to help in security. So I've worked in state and local governments, education, biotech, manufacturing, financial services, software development. Fun fact, I spearfish. But when I tell that to people in our industry, they don't want to take my emails anymore. But I actually swim in the ocean and catch fish. And this is one of the latest fish I've caught. Love my job, love helping making the internet a better place. And I hope that these exercises and real world experience that we're going to do today really give you on the job experience to help you in your daily jobs. Josh?
I'm not a practitioner like Benjamin, and I don't live anywhere near the ocean. I'm in Austin, Texas, which is in Texas. And I do long for the day when you'll invite me to San Diego and we can maybe go spearfishing together. We do other kinds of spearfishing in the lab here, but my background is a little bit more academic. And so in research and studying threat groups, in particular attacker psychology, trying to understand what their motives are, what's behind their campaigns, what's really going into not just sandboxing and looking at how their malware behaves or anything like that, but what's driving the motivation and what's driving the underlying or hidden most of the time economics of it. And that really is the thread that I pulled on in my academic research around cryptocurrencies and how cryptocurrencies sort of create the oxygen within which the cyber criminal underground can operate. And so anyway, we're really happy that you're here, and we're going to get into some of this material real quick and teach you how to unmask and defeat these people. Also, we have giveaways. So we're glad you're here. Obviously, when it comes to the workshops, typically is attended by members of our community. There's over 100,000 security professionals in the RiskIQ community. Today, someone will receive a $100 gift card to Amazon, which, I hear, Benjamin, you can get more than books there now. So I think you can get like lawn furniture and, the flamingos that go in your yard. I think you can even get Scotch tape, just about anything on Amazon.com. So the image says $75 gift card, but it's actually a $100 gift card. So thanks for being here. Somebody's going to give you a gift card at the conclusion. If we carry on real quick, we want to get an idea of who's in the room. Now, generally, when this was a physical event, we could just say, by a show of hands, who does this? And how often have you used that? It just gives us a good idea of your experience and what you've done with that experience when it comes to threat intelligence, the use cases, the job function, and so on, because it helps us just tailor things to that particular concern. If I work in vuln management, I'm doing things a little bit differently than if I'm digital risk, which is different than if I'm in IR, right? So just by show of hands real quick, in the virtual sense of a poll question, not what's your favorite color or anything like that, but did want to understand first is, the length of your experience. How long have you worked with threat intelligence, used threat intelligence? And generally, Benjamin, when this question comes up, thanks, Barrett. Barrett from our marketing team is operating the polls today and making sure that all the switchboard cords are plugged in to make sure that we stay connected on Zoom. But generally, most people answer one of the first two. They say either less than 2 years or between 2 and 5. So less than half a decade, most people have worked with threat intelligence. Some even say never. And then occasionally you have some veterans, but we try to make this accessible to whatever your experience level has been.
And we'll frame our responses and things based upon the audience, and we'll go into greater detail into the areas where you want us to. So what we see is 33% less than 2 years, 41% 2 to 5 years. We have 26% that have more than 5 years, and no one has said never, first time.
Okay, so no first timers, unless you were a little shy in answering the question. We understand that not everybody answers the question, and that's okay too. But just again, it helps us gauge what it is that we can gear things toward. And then Barrett, I think the next question would be the principal use case, right? So what ways do you use threat intelligence? So, my organization uses threat intelligence in these ways, and you can choose multiples there that are of, I believe so. I think you can choose multiples on this one, but if not, well, I guess it's really the primary. So it may be a multiple choice, it may or may not, folks. But again,
the top two, maybe the top two would be good.
The top two, but
yeah,
just generally we use it in this capacity, and we'll just give it a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 close, and then we'll see.
Okay, so what we have is 70. It's tied. 76% instant response and vuln management. First time for that, and then we have strategic planning at 48%, third-party risk management at 43%, and counterattack and takedown at 19%.
Really cool. Love you folks out there that do counterattack and takedown. That's my fun jam. That's what I did when I first cut my teeth in security. But interesting that third-party risk, that's what we're going to get into today. You're going to learn a little bit about how to use threat intelligence in a third-party context. So that's good to know that some of you may not generally use it in that capacity. So we'll show you how. It's really easy. It's just, mirror what your own attack surface looks like and the threats against you, and just step into somebody else's.
When you step into the other piece, it could be your supply chain.
Yeah.
It could be somebody you're looking at purchasing, or it could even be a competitor. So those are all the things that we're going to go into and talk about. But you have to think of it that way, is that if your competitor has a weakness and you can talk about it, then it makes you a little bit better. So you have to know what you're up against as well.
That's not a half bad idea. Being able to differentiate from a competitor in that sense of like being able to show that you have greater security or not as many big problems. And then real quick, and we may ask a couple more questions later, just to again gauge based on the lab exercises we get into here in a bit, but the kinds of threats that you care most about. So the organization is most concerned about these kinds, and that's the hacktivists, that's the nation states, ransomware, espionage, all these various types. Insider is on there, and again, you can choose multiples here because there could be many different variety that you're most concerned about. So we'll just give that a sec, because sometimes you have to think about it. Okay, well, sometimes my insider threats are a form of domestic cybercrime. Sometimes it's user error. Let me think about that for a moment. So we'll just give it a sec for you to select the ones that matter most, because we're going to get into every one of these different types you're going to see today. Because that's what happens when you're dealing with phishing and third parties and ransomware. Those are really the tactics that all of these various threat types can take. So,
well, one of the things I wanted to mention was the reason why we're going to talk about ransomware and phishing isn't because it's part of the supply chain, but that's a lot of the ways people get attacked. And if it does affect the supply chain, it could affect you, or if it affects you, it affects your supply chain that you're giving stuff to. So that's why we're going into those, to show that that's usually the foothold of how it came in.
That's exactly right. I saw a report recently from CISA. I guess it was back in April, and it was something like 54, 55. It was just over the 50 mark % of successful breaches in 2020 on US businesses came through a third party as the original source. So more than half. Okay, real quick.
Nation state 52%, hacktivists 36%, insider threats 56%, ransomware 80%. So that's the biggest one. Espionage 28%, domestic cybercrime 32%, brand abuse reputation is 52%. So nation state and brand abuse reputation tied. So the biggest ones are insider threat and ransomware. Those are the biggest ones.
Yeah, and they kind of can happen at the same time, right? You have an insider who could error, and that's exactly how ransomware took its hold. Or more nefarious insider threats as well can occur, and also coincide with ransomware, especially when it comes to who has access to the crown jewels. Sometimes that can be an insider, and we're going to show you today that that's the troubling thing with ransomware. It's just how distributable it is. And how with the right amount of money, you can hire someone to run the campaign for you when it comes to deploying a ransomware attack. So thanks for answering all those. Again, I think this is like 6 consecutive weeks that ransomware is number one.
Yeah.
That people are concerned about. So real quick, we're going to use actual stuff in our actual real world intelligence solution. So what that allows us to do is see today, what's the internet look like today? Because it is live stuff, which we're going to get to the lawyer disclaimer here in a moment. But in particular, on the threat intelligence side of RiskIQ around Illuminate and Passive Total, most people familiar with those 2 platforms. So those are the ones we're going to dive into a lot today. And then if we go to the next one, in particular, we're going to look at Illuminate. Now, it contains all the fun jazz that Passive Total has, except it also does that attack surface stuff. So you can look at your own attack surface. You can look at a third party's attack surface. In addition to that, there's also some research that's more finished intelligence in the form of CTI, cyber threat intelligence. And that's what is a unique thing about us, by the way. We care a whole lot about the loaded guns, more so than the fingerprints on it, like the person holding it. We look at infrastructure. We look at malicious infrastructure, problematic infrastructure that gets entangled with ourselves. Okay. And again, the way that we talk about that a lot is, when you're facing a loaded gun, what's the difference when it comes to who's firing the bullet at you? There's a lot of malicious infrastructure out there. A lot of it can be picked up and repurposed, reutilized by any number of folks. And what's interesting when you do infrastructure chaining, which Benjamin will go through a graphic on how that's performed here in a moment, but what that does is it allows you to see where all those guns are lying about, because there's thousands of people who could walk up, pick it up, and fire it. Irrespective of who that party is, it's important to know where the true weapons are lying around and where they can harm you.
Can I just say one thing? So when you think about like that aspect, think of it like the way that we traditionally protect an organization is you watch your perimeter. And as things come in, you check it as it comes in. But think of it like a suicide bomber. They can come there and blow it up and there's problems. But if you can go out like with a drone and look out at the landscape and find the threats before they get to you and eliminate them or prevent them from getting access to you, you're in a better situation. And that's what we're doing from this global perspective. We're trying to give you that visibility to show you where those threat actors are, what they're using, where they're located, so you can put mitigation controls. You could block those the traffic to and from those places. You can look at the hashes or the different things and make sure that you have the controls to stop them. So then you can prevent those attacks. And we generally see things as they're being set up and weaponized. So we're able to find these things, potentially a day or 2 or 3 days before they're really live or fully operational. So it will help you tremendously with the stuff that we're going to do.
Yeah, very helpful. And we are going to get into the lab. So
I'm going to quickly, let me just
got to get right provisioned.
I'm going to, I'm clicking on a bunch of stuff real quick. And I'm going to copy and paste some stuff into the chat. So
don't accidentally, you're clicking on a bunch of stuff. Don't click on the phishing example again.
No, I will not. I will not. So I'm going to paste in the credentials that we're going to be using today. Okay. And I am also going to put in the tools that we will use today as well. So we'll have those too. Okay.
There we go.
And I'll go back to the deck and here we go. So what we did was, because if you used your own credential, you would see your own attack surface. And if you had third parties, you would see only your third parties. We wanted the lab to represent like you were a company. And so what we did was we did the Swatch Group.
Benjamin, you linked it to the panelists and not to everyone. So you want to drop those in again?
I'm sorry. Let me do that again.
Yeah, it's like the Zoom web meeting. It's as if it defaults to think that we want to have private conversations only. Um, and so it does only the panelists by default. Sorry about that, everyone. Uh, you're gonna get the
Give me 1 second. Here we go. Chat. Here we go. Everyone.
yeah,
Okay, here we go. And then
credentials
tools.
and then the tools.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't, when I looked at it, I didn't check that setting. Okay,
There we go, everyone.
okay. Yeah, so the credentials we're going to be using today will get you into a lab where you will have the ability to see an organization like you were there and to see some third parties associated with it. So please log in, make sure you can get in. I checked it this morning. It was working fine. But this will give you access to the lab environment. And when we're done, we're going to tear it down and you won't have access after the class.
Thumbs up. Now, you also now know that this is very much live. This is not a pre-canned recording here. So you can see this. And so with that in mind, this is live stuff. Now we expect that everyone here is a reasonable adult and a professional. So obviously we have every bit of trust that you're going to use your best judgment, but lawyers rule the world. So here's the disclaimer, folks. This is live information directly from the internet today. This isn't a sandbox. This is real information, real URLs that will take you to real places that aren't always necessarily good. Okay, so proceed with caution, use the buffers, use the tools that we have, like for example, URL scan.io, great way to see what the image of the website looks like, get a few tidbits and tags about things that make it malicious without actually going there. Google safe browsing, etc. Puts a buffer between you and the bad thing. But there it is. Now we've satisfied the lawyers.
Yeah.
Let's get into having some fun and be a little reckless if we can be. Go ahead, Benjamin. You were going to talk about these tenets.
Yeah, so today what we're going to talk about is know your allies. So you have to know yourself, and then from knowing yourself, you can understand what you might depend upon as an organization, some software, some services, but you also have a supply chain, and that supply chain could be a physical supply chain where you're getting commodities from, or it could be processing. It could be something like your email service or your payment card processing. And so we're going to use some exercises that are going to kind of look at those types of stuff. So next week's will be on know your enemies. And while we're putting this together, we found a lot of cool stuff for next week. So that will be 2 weeks from now. That will be the next one that we're going to do. Okay.
It's really cool, folks. Some of the stuff we found, we were geeking out, right, Benjamin, earlier this week when we found a lot of bad hosting out there. But more on that to come in 2 weeks when we get into knowing your enemy.
Yeah.
So it should say tenet number 2, which is knowing your allies.
That's right.
From last week, hold over. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm interrupted you. Go ahead, Benjamin.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So this is live. So remember, if you have a question, put it into the chat and we're going to answer it live. So we're going to go through and try to answer any questions if you want to know why something or get some greater detail. We have Caroline on with us monitoring the chat, so we'll be able to answer those questions. If it's a great question, she'll unmute herself and ask us, and we're going to get into greater detail. But we're going to go through, and what we're going to look at is the Swatch company, the Swatch Group, and they have many different organizations underneath them. So we're going to look at how they're set up, and then look at some supply chains and even some of their competitors, and look how they look. So we're going to look at the organization and see if there's any e-commerce vulnerabilities that exist. And I found a couple. And then we'll go into third-party vulnerabilities and exposures and look at some of theirs. And then we're going to go into a phishing email where if, for example, an organization was using PayPal, how could you be phished? But we're going to be looking at stuff from the perspective of not looking at the email, because in an organization, you don't generally get the phishing email that the customer got or your somebody out in the real world. So I'm going to show you how to do that phishing investigation based upon looking at the known good domain. In this case, it's going to be PayPal. And then we're going to go through and talk about ransomware and the 1% group and talk about the research that we did. And I have some Maltego maps that I created to show how everything links together, because we have great data and the pivots are the connections, but sometimes it's hard to understand the full scope and picture of what's there. And so I created some maps to show that, and we'll go in and we'll take a look at those.
Yeah, and folks, Caroline just made a really good point in the chat. You can also use the little Q&A icon too to ask questions there, as well as in the chat, wherever it suits your fancy. Unfortunately, when there's big crowds like this, everybody's on mute. Otherwise, we could all just chat at the same time. But you can use those two avenues of the chat as well as the Q&A. So let's think about this for a sec. Digital came along and ate the world. Okay. And so through no fault of our own, as security professionals, the world changed underneath our feet. And so being victims of circumstance, of everything becoming digitized, the physical world has been disintegrated into bits and bytes and ones and zeros, right? Things that were formerly a physical object is now a digital thing. And so that being the case, it creates a few challenges. So number one is the transformation itself created an almost infinite number of attacker targets. Goody. Not only that, did we nuzzled up next to the criminals that are hitting us themselves. When we dissolve the perimeter, we got new neighbors. And those new neighbors that we're living amongst, we can get entangled with them. And we can get a lot of inadvertent risk and threat just because we're living out there in the space, bumping up next to one another in this ocean of the internet. It's also very irregular and it's continuously changing. It's very fluid. It's not hardened. It's not locked down. There is no perimeter. So it becomes a little bit problematic to just see what's what, who's who, what's good, what's bad, what's me, what's another, what's an adversary, what's an ally. And so that makes it difficult. And secondly, to know what matters most. So when I try to prioritize things, first I have to identify it before I can even know if it's important. But then even once it's identified, is it actually important? Well, most intelligence doesn't tell you that because it's not really relevant necessarily to your particular circumstance. It doesn't take into account the complexity or the continuous change and dynamism. There we go. We fit in the little $5 word, the dynamism of your own attack surface, right? Which is always changing. And so it can be difficult to say, does this matter or not? And there's an ocean of threat intelligence out there. And most of it, I'm going to go ahead and say, as a threat intelligence company, most of it isn't all that relevant to you. But there are key things that are hyper relevant because they relate to you and your attack surface and your extended ecosystem with those third parties. And then next comes the actionability of it. Sometimes a lot of threat intelligence is sort of like, FYI, this thing is bad, and you might have it in your environment. Right. Have fun, but it doesn't really give you the action that you can take because it really doesn't discriminate the actor and the malware that could hit and distinguish that from the nuclear missile silo that is sitting next to you that has the launch codes already keyed in and the weapon is about to launch. Most threat intelligence in terms of like getting the outcome I want, which is keep it from happening in the first place, really only becomes applicable after something is already detonated and I'm trying to, black box figure out how the plane crashed. But instead, it ought to be able to give you the outcome of the plane never crashing in the first place, because what was going wrong, sorry, we live in metaphors here in the intelligence world. And so sorry if we mix them together, but instead of waiting for the wreckage to occur and then tease out the intelligence of what happened here, instead, when you do this drone fly out, like Benjamin was talking about, you're taking care of the threat beforehand. And so you really get the outcome you want, which is no incident at all. And then finally, that is what leads to, the ultimate holy grail of scaled defense that adapts as your attack surface and the adversary's attack surface changes. So that way, as I move through this fluid space, I'm continuously protected because my defenses are always up to date. And so when we think about an attack surface, it's pretty simple. It's a ball. So this is a ball, very simple, orange side, blue side. On the blue side is the typical thing we're used to, the devices that are out there, the actual bare metal hardware with some software running on it, where things can go wrong. So think about an endpoint. Something happens on an endpoint. We then look in our EPP, we look in our EDR, we get some analysis, some sandboxing perhaps, we rip apart the malware, maybe get some response insights, and then we apply defense to all. Well, on the other side of the ball is everything that's not a device, everything out there in the digital, dematerialized, non-physical domain, all the bits and bytes. And so when that happens out there on the internet, we still need to do the same process of how does it relate to my attack surface? What intelligence is there? Is there an actual vulnerability here? Are there active exploits? What ought I to do relative to myself in this ethereal digital space? And then apply to all. Just in this case, it's the internet itself. Again, keeping my digital presence digitally protected. And that's the digital side of the attack surface. So here at RiskIQ, we handle the orange side of that attack surface. And so when we talk about attack surface and external attack surface and those kinds of things, that's what we're talking about. All that digital property that you have that can ultimately, and digital persons that are out there floating about, like customers and employees and partners and actual human beings that can also be exploited.
And your brand, yeah.
And your brand, some of these things that aren't necessarily a piece of IT, but it is still something that has importance to you. It matters to you. So we go on to, again, pretty simple concept there. And we do that because we relate everything to everything else. Earlier, I mentioned that, you and others, good and bad, adversary and ally, we do that because we graph everything. So we have these virtual users, they go around to everything that's on the internet and they touch it, they provoke it, they see what comes back. So that way you don't have to. And then by way of provoking the internet itself, we're able to then read its response and understand how it behaves and also track and monitor whether or not it's malicious and who owns it, what they're doing with it, how does it relate to everything else around it. And by provoking the internet itself and getting a response, it allows us to capture a lot of information and then relate it all together. Not just the functional behaviors, but the anatomy itself. How does it all connect? And so that then gives us those opportunities to have a unified view of the whole thing, your own tailored view. Again, understand the adversary side of that because they own a swatch of this attack surface worldwide too. And then being able to extend those global defenses accordingly and adapt them as that whole tapestry changes. And we do so in those 5 key areas. So attack surface yourself, SecOps, being able to feed and get the speeds needed to inform and make intelligent all the things in the security stack, keeping an eye on adversaries by way of fingerprinting them and seeing when they pop up again, because they spin up, they spin down, they go behind bulletproof hosting and obfuscate themselves, but we'll show you where they are. Third parties and what they have cooking. And then finally, being able to look at your weaknesses and the vulnerabilities that are going on within your organization. But not only that, being able to look at active exploits, because again, what we're looking at all the time is just observing the internet. How is it behaving? How is it relating? And what's its anatomy? And in doing so, we can also pick up the exploits that are out there, from people soliciting things on the deep dark web to confirmed success when exploiting a vulnerability. So going on, we're going to get into labs now, but sorry, Benjamin, I cut you off there.
Oh, no. So we already talked about the agenda of what we're going to do. So when you think about the data that we bring in, as we capture this data, we're bringing in the full document object model. We acted like a real user coming from geographic diverse places through proxies. We are acting like every device. We're acting like your parents on the internet, like Josh was mentioning, provoking the internet, and doing this thing at scale. And as we bring this information in, we generally do about 2 billion web requests a day. What we're doing is looking at the open internet. This is like if you're walking down the street looking at stuff from a public place. We're grabbing all this information. We're looking at the mobile app stores as well, bringing in those APKs, figuring out how sandboxing them, looking at them. We have over 106 billion unique DNS records. We get about 5.5 new host resolutions a day and about 250,000 new domain resolutions a day. So what that does is it allows our security research team and threat intelligence teams look at this data and figure out what's happening. So what happens is every day we have a new piece of the internet that we've observed, and we merge it with what we had. And during that time, it allows us to even roll back and even create new data sets, like cookies were created that way. We looked at trackers, things like that, where we can go back and create these new things and roll them forward through all the data sets that we have. So we understand how every website is interconnected, what's coming in, what's going out, the little bits of code that run that track user experience, but also allow us to track campaigns and other things. The passive DNS, the historic data that we're seeing, that allows us to create derived data sets as well to understand who's phishing, the 0 days, the domain infringement, where things are running that are bad that might not be from a bad place. Like it might be hosted on a good site, but there's bad malware on there or a script. That's like the accomplice list and scams and IoTs and different stuff. So this infrastructure chaining that we do allows us to start with a single indicator. For example, a piece of malware. And we can look at that malware and say that malware was coming from this IP address and this certificate was on that IP. That certificate is also associated with this domain, this other IP, another certificate, a tracker, and we can build out these relationships. And that's what we're going to do today when we go through some of the phishing exercises, is look at these relationships and understand how they play together to understand the full aspect of that attack. And then that's what you need to block. So what we found out was a lot of our community users, when they would come and use Passive Total, a lot of the time they were looking at open source intelligence articles. So what we did was we saw that they were coming in and we talked with them and they said, well, I go and I see this article that came out and I look at the indicators in RiskIQ because generally you'll have more information, or from when it was published, there's more things that the threat actor has adapted. And now I want to find the new things. So they'll spend their morning going through and doing that. So what we did was we decided to enhance those open source intelligence articles with RiskIQ researchers and threat analysts. So they'll go through and take an article that somebody else published, but we will look at our data and find more stuff and make that available. So then when you look at the RiskIQ indicators, there's more infrastructure chained together that you can take and immediately use and get value, that you don't have to go through and do that work yourself. So we also look at the reputation of every domain and IP address. And this is a dynamic process that if you query this in Illuminate, we will tell you how that IP or domain is, and we'll give you the score and we give you the breakdown of how we derive that score. So when you think about like a third-party provider that gives you a risk score, they're buying data and feeds. They have no context at all about that data. We actually gather the data ourselves. So we understand the context and the relationships and why that's important and how that plays a part to determine if it's good or bad. Josh, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to put this out there. Okay. Here's the thing too. We're going to show you the things that we factored into the score. But if you want to, you can go into that actual thing and see everything else about it.
Right.
Okay. So the thing is that it's not just a score that is based upon information gathered for the purpose of factoring into a formula. So like if you have like 4 factors that go into your formula, what a lot of these like third-party rating ones do, they go out and they find those 4 factors so that they can put it in the formula. We don't do that. We may have the different factors in the formula, but there's a whole lot of other things that we went and gathered too, that you may find relevant and important to you to look into. We're not just sniffing out the keys and values that we need for the formula, but going and gathering everything from that attack surface, that entity, that living, breathing thing on the internet, so that you can understand it all if you desire. So just putting that out there too, that we're not just filtering pre-factoring.
The other thing we have to mention is that it's dynamic. It's as of right now. So the other people might have had this data and it's old and it's no longer relevant. And the person might say, I don't agree with that because we've taken care of that. That's old. Well, this is saying like it's here right now. And when we go through these examples, you're going to actually see that.
And by the way, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, here's the thing. Like if your procurement department needs to like check a box so they can ink a contract, okay. I kind of understand that. But if I'm looking at it from a third-party risk security context, it's not as timely, and it doesn't really tell me all the factors that I might want to consider, but just what that rating service thinks I should consider.
Right.
Just putting it out there.
Yeah.
That's all.
So remember, everything is complex, it's dynamic. We've seen, because of COVID, everybody was working remote, and things were put into place to allow people to work remotely that we didn't really factor in when this first started. And so because of all those changes that happened, it sped up your attack surface to the digital and to be a hybrid environment where you really need to know what's out there. And that's what we're going to get into today.
Exactly. And again, we all talk about the work from home part, but I mean, think about how many new apps got delivered. I mean, it was like the agile philosopher, the person that really loves the agile philosophy. It was like their dream come true. Ship it, ship it, ship it, ship it, left and right. Okay. New sites were stood up, new e-commerce, new ways to interact with partners, even physical suppliers and so on. Everything went digital in an instant. And so it created just an explosion of that attack surface in the digital space. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted. We're going to get into the labs here, and I'm slowing you down.
No, go ahead. I'm just doing the copying and pasting right now. I'm going to jump back in a second, but I just wanted to get this going while you were talking.
But go ahead. Let's look at Swatch real quick. Sorry, folks. This is our chocolate. And again, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be prepping all of this stuff for that Thursday. And so sometimes when you come onto the calls on Thursdays for the workshops, we're sort of just teeming with excitement to tell you all about it. But go ahead, Benjamin. We can get into this first one.
Okay, so you can just follow along, and as I go through, I'll paste in the individual pieces that we need to do. But what we're going to talk about is this attack surface observation area here. So if you click on this is going to show your organization's attack surface. And this credential has been set up to use the Swatch Group as your organization. So today we are all working for that organization, and we're going to go through and examine their attack surface and understand how it is. And we'll look at all the pieces, and then we're going to examine some of the vulnerabilities that exist. And then we're going to see if there's any additional vulnerabilities that we came across, and I did. So we'll look at those, and then we're going to go look at the third-party piece of their supply chain. Okay, but before we can get to the third-party piece, like last week, you have to know yourself. So we're going to go through and look at ourselves real quick for this particular organization, and then we're going to jump to the larger group and then analyze those, and then we'll go into some use cases for phishing, like what they might come across.
Yeah. And so, I think I like this one. We were talking about this earlier this week, right? That Swatch is a really interesting example because it's a physical company that creates physical goods, watches, right? But in that physical space, it sort of mirrors what most digital businesses look like now, which is a very big supply chain with a lot of component parts that go into the final production of this thing that you have. And so I thought that was interesting that there's a lot of dependencies to create a single Swatch watch. Takes something in the neighborhood of like 120 components to create a single watch. And so,
but the group also owns many other watch companies, and so that's what we're going to get into as well.
Yeah, that's where you start to get the exponential n, to the power of n. But somebody says they're not able to copy the links in the chat.
You won't need to right now. You won't need to copy them. Just okay. Go into just come into here, and then I'll show you the pivots where I'm going from. So you'll be fine. So when you think of this is like the morning cup of coffee. Anything in the high severity means that you need to stop what you're doing and take care of those right away. So that's the first thing you have to remember. So right now there's nothing in the high severity. The medium severity is, hey, I need to look at this, but it might not be something that I need to take care of myself, but I might need to work with another group to take care of it. Okay. So it might be that, hey, we're running an older version of something, and that older version of something has a vulnerability. I'm not responsible for those versions, but I need to go talk to that group and say, we need to get off of it because it's a security concern. And if we don't do it, then I'll be involved with the cleanup and saying, I told you so. So that's what the medium severity, and the low severity might be something you might need to plan to say, hey, we have this deprecated version of something and we need to take care of it. Or we have some certificates that are expiring in 60 days. Let's make sure that they don't expire because no one will be able to get there after that. So let's look at this medium severity, okay? So when we look at this medium severity, the only thing that's showing up is this Mage Cart Actors end of life Magento 1.x, and they're attacking these and getting in. So RiskIQ had discovered skimmers that were being added into Magento during the checkout process, where somebody can go through and during the normal checkout, when the user puts things in their cart and then submits it for payment and to order those goods, a copy of the credentials and the credit card information was sent to a third party, the threat actor, directly from the client. So the organization that has the Magento running never saw those transactions, and it was a script that was added to that code on the website. So when the client got it, it loaded that script, added the malware to it, and it became a form hijack thing where it was scraping the credentials and sending it directly to the threat actor or to a place where the threat actor wanted the data. And we talked about this last time. With those ways of sending the data, it's sometimes not direct transmission of the credentials. It might be obfuscated or as a request for an image. And that image doesn't exist on that third-party website, but it's being logged to see what images are being requested that don't exist. And then deobfuscating those file names have the data in it. So I've seen that happen. So it's a novel way of getting to exfiltrate data from someone's machine that you normally wouldn't block or see. So if we look at this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up. So if you click on it, it now shows you that article. It will give you the link to it. So if I right click on this and I open another tab, you'll actually see the article that we created and talking about some indicators and things. But it gives me the direct information for myself to know this is the actual host that's running this older version of Magento. So here's 1.9, okay? So it tells me right away that this is the particular machine. And if I right click on that one and open that up in another tab, you will see that device in the regular view that what we normally see. And inside of here, I can look at the components, and in those components, you can see it listed right here, okay? The Magento 1.9. So this gives me the capability to know that, hey, this could be breached anytime because there's a vulnerability in that version of Magento. It's very old. I think they're on version 3 dot something or higher. So it's a very old version. Now, if we take a look at the screen right here, it says resolving IP block listed. So they've probably had some problems in the past where they've cleaned stuff up or things have happened. And now this middle section is the heat map. This represents 6 months worth of data. And every number inside these boxes represents a unique IP address we saw. Now you'll see a curve on the bottom and you'll see a curve at the top. The curve on the bottom is the end of a month. The curve on the top is the beginning of the month. Now, we generally don't get told exactly when something's happening. It's always after the fact, like yesterday, last week, last month. Now go do your investigation. So RiskIQ gives you the capability to filter the data because there might be a lot. So I can click on one square and see just that 1 day's worth of data, or I can hold the shift key down and click on something and see that whole period of time. So it allows me to filter the results to show specific time periods, okay? And if I want to refresh it to see everything, I can just refresh the view, or I can go and click on a different time period and go back. Now, this bottom bar is all the data that RiskIQ has collected over time. So we have data going back to 2016 on this domain, okay? So I can click on that and see that 6-month window of time, okay? So down below gives me resolutions. I can look to see what IP addresses, where those are located, get the who is. Now, the important thing to think about is, if we know that there's a problem with this machine and there's a vulnerability there, this is something that should be swapped out as quickly as possible. It is your e-commerce component that people are going to be making transactions into your organization, buying goods or potentially services. And if there's a problem with that mechanism to get that data in, you really need to fix it as quickly as possible. Now, if we go back to that list again, there was another one called shop.swatch.com. And if we look at these, we can see Magento as well. Okay, let me see all the highlights in here. CAPTCHA. I'll just go to it directly and we'll see it in here. Components. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell it I want to see 500. There's 544. So I'm going to expand the list so I can see everything. And then here we go, 1.8. So the other one was 1.9. We're running 1.8. And as of the 14th, it was here. So what's nice about having the first seen and last seen date is that if you're looking at a third-party vendor, for example, and you tell them there's a problem and they update their software and they put a new version on there, when we scan them again, when we communicate to those IPs and domains on the internet, we will then stop showing this one and we'll show the new one with the new start date and the new end date, or that last date will be blank, showing that that's what it's currently at right now. So we can tell when these get modified. So when we go back, if we went back in shop.swatch.com, if they went through and updated Magento, they would then see a new version, a new thing. So let's go back to the list again. Okay, so I'm just gonna hit the back button twice to see this. And let's go to this this one right here, the first one. And I'm going to change this to .com. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hit .com. Okay, so now when I search this is now the one that's focused on the US market. Okay, now let's go look at the components. And there's 300 components here. And they're running Magento 2.3.0. And this one still has some problems, some older versions that are still susceptible to some attacks. So this is running newer infrastructure, but it's not running the latest. And there's some potential problems with this. So as we go through and we look at these vulnerabilities and different things, this gives us the capability of quickly jumping in and looking at all of the pieces to see what's there, but that old version should immediately be replaced right away, because we know that threat actors can target that and go after it. Okay, so let's go back to, I just clicked on the RiskIQ logo and I'm going back to the attack surface. So as we move down in this attack surface area, we're showing you all of the assets that we see for this Swatch Group. The IPs, the certificates, IP blocks, the cloud hosts, the whois contacts, the host domains. And if I click on those, I can see them. We can also see if anything new has been added over the last 30 days. So nothing has been new in the last 30 days. Now, when we analyze that attack surface, we want to show the web server distribution. What type of infrastructure that they're running, okay? And we even look at the cloud providers to understand that. So we know that they're running IIS, Akamai, Apache, Kubernetes. They're running PHP, Springbot, ASP, and PHP. So that gives me the understanding of what types of frameworks and web server distributions they're using. As you go down further, we can also look and say, hey, what cloud providers are they using? How is this hybrid cloud being utilized by this organization? Is it only in one particular cloud provider like Amazon or Google, or is it spread out across the world? Now, the next section, the vulnerability and exposures, this is pretty interesting. So what we do is we look at the IPs and domains that are listed up above, and we check them against the articles that are in the tip inside of the threat intelligence portal. Now, if we see one of those IPs or domains hit on an article that was there, we let you know. So if we take a look at this, and if I right click and open this up in another tab, so I'm just going to close these tabs down real quick and do it again. Open another tab. I can see that article, okay? And inside here, there's some public indicators, and here are the RiskIQ indicators. Okay, so I'm going to go back now, and instead of clicking on the article, I'm going to right click on the count and open that one up in another tab. So when I do that, it will now give me that, hey, there's these two domains were registered to the Swatch Group, okay? But they were part of that, there was a hit on that article about this ATP group, Transparent Tribe. And you're going, that's kind of strange. So now I want to know, since I'm doing security for them, I want to know, what does that mean? How is that saying that it's related to my infrastructure? Go ahead.
They offloaded it and forgot. Did they
potentially? So we're gonna go.
Management came along. Under new management came along.
You could absolutely be right, but let's go through and investigate that, because you have to know for sure. So let's do this. So I'm going to right click on this domain name, and I'm going to open another tab. Okay. I'm also going to copy this domain name. So I'm just going to copy this. I'll do it from here. I usually use Chrome, so it's kind of a little difficult for me to do this. So I'm going to copy the domain name. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to this article, and I'm going to say show all the IPs, all the domains. Command F, find it. It's not listed here. I'm going to the public indicators. I'm going to see if I can show all of these, and I'm going to look for it. Okay. Command F, Command V. Oops, I already had done that. So let me do it one more time. Okay, no hits on that. So I'm going, why did it hit? So let's go back down and let's look at this IP address. It says it's suspicious. So I'm going to copy this one. Okay, so I'm going to right click, open another tab just so I can easily copy it inside of Safari. And now let's go back, and if I do a Command F, Command V, okay, it's not there. Let's go to the other one. There it is. So we found this indicator, and we go, hey, it's linked there because of the IP address. So now let's go look at the domain and understand the domain and how it's there. So we had said initially that, hey, this particular domain belonged to the Swatch Group because it was registered before, okay, back in 2012, okay? So let's go look at it now. So when we look at this domain and I go to the Who Has Records, we have a history of all of the Who Has Records. So if we go back to the very bottom, we can see here, Swatch Group, they owned it, okay? So as we go through time, I can look still the Swatch Group, Swatch Group, Swatch Group, Swatch Group. And then 2018, it goes to privacy protected, and it's no longer the Swatch Group. So they don't own it anymore. But because that linkage showed it was part of that infrastructure, because they had owned that domain and then stopped having it, somebody else bought it. So Josh, you were right. So This is something that was left over. So this was part of the infrastructure at one point, and that's why it hit on it.
There you have it. And that happens every day. I mean, every day we let certain domains expire or we offload them. We're no longer going to utilize that domain name. But then, anybody else can come along and say, I'll have it for myself then.
Right. But this is when I went through and I looked, I was like, oh, there's a good nugget here, but it was nothing. But it was old infrastructure that had a history belonging to them that's being reused. But the bad thing is that even though that they gave up the domain, the public doesn't know that domain was given up. So the public could still fall for a phishing attack or different type of stuff, because at one point it used to be there.
Especially when it has the company's name right there inside of it.
Right.
Inside the full domain name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is something
right.
So you got it right. So I wanted you to see that type of way of looking at yourself. So this one is fairly good. They only have one thing. They just need to update their magenta. That's it. So if we go back to RiskIQ, we're now going to look at third-party intelligence. Okay. And when we look at the third-party intelligence, when I built this out, I said, okay, I need to get some, probably some raw materials, maybe some metal, maybe some batteries. There might be different organizations that also sell watches that I would want to monitor. Maybe I want to do a merger acquisition. Maybe they're a competitor. I want to look at all of them. So I looked at like Rolex, Seiko, Duracell, Energizer. Omega is a metal mining company. It's not the watch company. But I added all these things in here so I can look at a single view and understand. I even added some telecommunication companies in here, just so I understand the potential vulnerabilities that you might have through like a hosting provider if you have your services there, or you're doing a marketing campaign, or if there's local distributors doing stuff, it might affect your brand. So I wanted to look at some different areas around the world and put some of those together.
And you bring up a fine point. There's so many people. I mean, we talk to them every day, right? Like, I don't really have that big of a digital supply chain, and there's not that much interaction and complexity when it comes to the vendors I'm using and so forth. But I mean, we all have telecom third parties.
Right.
We all utilize those types of services, cloud applications, hosting services. Anyway, just that's an interesting take on it, because we're not just looking at in industry third parties that I operate with, or direct suppliers or competitors or joint venture operations or anything, but the facilitators of the digital existence itself, like a telecom.
Right. It could be that you outsourced your email to Gmail or Microsoft. It could be that you're doing some payment card processing from Square or from PayPal or a particular financial institution. It could be that you're loading a particular Marketo script to be able to understand how your marketing campaign goes. But each one of those pieces, or Shopify, each one of those little components could be compromised. And when you load it on your site, or when the end user loads it because you have it calling it, it could impact them.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to have this diversified thing in here. So if we went through and we looked at like Hermes watches. So this is a direct competitor. So if we take a look in here, we have the high, mediums, and lows. So if we look at the highs, inside of here, I can see there was this push dairy crash on specially crafted HTTP2 headers. So if I expand this out, I can understand the CVE. So I can right click, immediately understand that CVE. I can bring it up. I can see that information. But one thing I want to show you, if I copy this CVE, okay, and I go back to the main view, okay, and I put in any CVE. So I'm just going to put a CVE number in there. Oops, sorry. I want to make sure it's searching the intelligence card. I'm going to put this in here and I'm going to search. So immediately it gives me this view and it says, hey, these are the impacted components. these are the third parties that I have that have this vulnerability immediately. So I can see that, hey, each one of these had particular, there's 9 records. So I can look at all 9 and see what the count is for that CVE vulnerability. So if a 0-day or something comes out and you want to look to see, does this affect me or my third parties that I'm monitoring, I can immediately put that in and get that information and see it. Okay. So I can see if it affects me and others right away and know that. And I can pick up the phone, I can call them, and I can understand the vulnerabilities that might exist there. Okay. So the other piece is that when there's an active proof of concept vulnerability, known exploit, we will show it to you where it is. So you'll see that information. We also show you the deep and dark web chatter on that CVE. So if they're actively talking about it and there's an active exploit, we will actually show you that score and say, hey, really the priority score is this. Even though the CVSS3 is 7.5, we say it's higher up to a score of 100 because we know that there's an exploit and there's chatter about it that's happening on the deep and dark web. So you really need to take care of this.
Mm-hmm.
So this gives you that other viewpoint that when the manager walks into the room and says, hey, there's a CVE, I just heard about it on the news. Does this affect us? Do we have to worry about this? And you're like, I don't know. Now you know a way to know without having to do a lot of time and effort research, as long as you have them as third parties. So you can go through and look at these, and it's really cool to be able to understand all of these issues. You can even look at the top vulnerabilities that exist in your own organization and what CVEs and assets and which ones are there, okay, and the counts that happen there. So you have that capability of looking at it not from the insights, but also the actual CVEs that are there and the CWEs, and understand those breakdowns that are in here. So when you build out your third-party intelligence, it's a really good thing to talk to the other members of your organization and find out what that, if something happened, it's like looking at your disaster recovery plan. Like, hey, if we had a disaster, if something happened, how are we going to get back online? So it's looking at all those major pieces that your organization will look at, and that basically makes up your third-party portfolio. So like if your email was down, how are you going to take emails? Well, you might go to another provider. You need to monitor it. You need to see, well, what is that risk of Google or Microsoft going down? It's probably pretty low, but if there was a vulnerability that affected them, you would want to know if they have it. So this gives you that capability of seeing that. So this is a way that you can easily see a count and say, hey, let's find one. Omega has one. So let's look at what Omega has. So it has that same vulnerability that we saw earlier, but everything else is clear. There's not stuff in there. So let's go and look at Duracell. We'll go look at Duracell. So Duracell has 2 medium vulnerabilities. They have to deal with, they're dealing with WordPress. They have some domains that are going to expire in 60 days. That's nothing to write home about. That happens all the time. And then we can look and see, hey, they're in Azure and Amazon and AWS. So that's how they're broken down. Their certificates, how those are broken down, when they're going to expire, and everything looks good. Now, let's go look at one of the organizations that has to deal with, we'll look at Charter Communication. And because they're a hosting provider, hosting providers they sell rack space, or they could sell an IP address. They can just let people put equipment in there. So they can be hosting a lot of bad stuff. So if we scroll down to the bottom, here's all the things that we saw coming from their IPs and domains that are there. But I want to go down to the IP reputation area. And the IP reputation section is based upon the attacks, the type of traffic that we've seen, the exploits that we've seen out in the wild, that we tie back to IPs and domains that are coming from this ASN or this organization. It doesn't mean that they own it. It just means that it might be hosted there. It's coming from their owned IP space, but they might not be in control of it. So just bear that in mind. So if we look at like remote access servers and we take a look at these, we can start to see exactly which ones have remote access capability established, where we've seen traffic coming from. And we can look at the source of what ASN these were coming from when we saw those, okay? And how we determined it was part of that organization. So this is that chain of custody of why this piece we're saying belongs to that attack surface. Everybody good so far?
Yeah, maybe. I know we talked about infrastructure chaining and some of that. In terms of the discovery chain, do you want to speak just a little bit more to how that's derived and how it could vary?
You mean in terms of like building out an attack surface, or from an investigation perspective?
From an investigative perspective.
Okay, so when we go through the next exercise, we're going to be using the infrastructure chain to build out things and show how the data is related and how we chain it together. So that will be the one that we're going to do for we're going to do on on PayPal phishing. So let me copy those real quick, and I'm going to paste those into the chat.
It's almost like I teed you up there.
You did, yeah. It was nice. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use now my Chrome browser, and I already have all these bookmarked. So I just gave everybody the PayPal pieces, okay? So if I come into here, and remember that we're recording this, I have also some slides that go along with these. So all of those will be given to you when we're done. So if we look at the PayPal objects, I'm just going to open these up, and we're going to look for phishing, but not from getting that phishing email. We're going to look for phishing that has occurred in the past and that is probably actively happening right now. And I'm going to show you some techniques to actually get that going. And at the same time, I'm going to, on another screen, I'm going to log into something real quick. Give me a second. I'm trying to just grab that one tab, move this tab over. I forgot to log into a system.
Oh, that's what it is.
Okay, so I've done that. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start off with PayPal objects. Okay, so if we search for PayPal objects, so www.paypalobjects.com. So I'll copy this and I'll show you how it looks like from your perspective if we were doing this manually. So if you searched from here, we're going to see, hey, it's part of PayPal holdings, but there's this little arrow here. And if you right click on this arrow, that will launch the advanced search capabilities to see the data. Okay. So from here, I have my unique resolutions for every day of the year, going back to, we saw data coming here from 2010. So this has been around for a long time, and you can see it's all based in the US. There's some other countries that are listed here as well. They're using Fastly. They had used Akamai in the past. Okay, so the way that we're going to find the phishing is that in this particular exercise, there's probably 3 different ways we can do it. We can do it from host pairs, cookies, and trackers. But today we're going to focus on host pairs. So think of host pairs like when you visit a website and you're on your computer and it brings down the website. Not all of the content is on that website. It might be running a script to pull data in from somebody else. It might be bringing an image from Pinterest. It might be sending analytics to Google to show how things are working. So there are different types of trackers and cookies and different things that get loaded on the machine and scripts that run. So because we act like the end user, we're seeing all those things happen. It's not that we're just looking at the server, we're looking at it from the user perspective. If an ad ran, we're seeing that ad run. We're understanding if there is malware in that advertisement that's happening. So we actually see all that stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter, and we're going to filter for CSS import. So this is the style sheets. Like if somebody was going to copy a website and understand like how their style sheets were set up, we're going to look to see if anybody did that to PayPal objects. So we're filtering on that. So the cause is a CSS import, and I put that little checkbox there. So that's filtered the results to show me those things. And I'm going to change it to show 500 things. Okay. So now this could be that it's a legitimate website that's using PayPal objects it's doing it, or it could potentially be something bad. And generally, if somebody puts down verification, so I just searched for verification, that's usually a red flag. So if it's like verification dash and it's something else, that's usually a red flag. You can see it's already been blocked for phishing by RiskIQ. Or unverified. Unverified. So here's one, confirmed unverified PPL account. So not pay, it says PPL, and so it's typo squatted domain. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and say, well, how can I look at the results here and then do some simple investigations to see if it's good or bad, and to be able to view those things and understand what does it look like without going there. Because remember, if you go there, you're tipping off the bad guy that you're investigating them. They could just block your traffic from your organization. So for example, everything that we do is a direct result of how the threat actors adapt once we publish something on them. And they adapt based upon what we do. So it's this cat and mouse game. So if we are coming from our own IP space, the threat actors can say, filter all traffic from this IP space. So when we try to go there, it goes, it doesn't exist. We can't get there. We go, oh, the internet's a clean place. So then we would say, well, let's go from a proxy. And then we go, we're going to come from the UK. And then they can say, well, just block traffic from the UK. So now we come from all the countries. And it might be that they're targeting end users. So it might be residential IP space they want, or corporate IP space, or government IP space. So we have to go through proxies and do things that make us look like the intended victim. So by us gathering that data and bring it back in, we have multiple views of gathering that data and viewing it and splicing it together to give you that full context. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to right click on this unconfirmed. So I'm going to open this one up in another tab, and unverified. And there's 3 of them. So I'm going to go to the next one, and there's a mail confirmed dash unverified PayPal account. So I'm going to open that one up in another tab. So just those 2 for now. Okay. So if we take a look at these, here's the confirmed unverified PayPal account. As you can see, it's only been up for a couple months. But the domain has had traffic going all the way back to 2018. So it's been registered in 2018, but just this last few months we see it. Okay. It's on one particular IP address. So I'm going to right click and open that up in another tab. And the reason for that, I want to see if it's a campaign from the same place. So maybe somebody has one IP and they're doing a campaign against PayPal. So that's why I'm going to open that up. I'm going to look at the host pairs. And the reason why I'm going to look at the host pairs is I want to see if they're linking to anything else. So you can see that there's some connections that are unknown. There's some top level redirects. So it might be that, hey, you go one place, it redirects you someplace else. So there's some things that are happening here, but you can see right here in this first one, as of August 17th, and as of the 15th, we saw that this thing was still connected, okay? So the next thing is, hey, I want to see this. That's all of us want to go, well, what does it look like? I don't have the email. I can't tell if it was really in a phishing campaign. How can I do it? So one of the things I can do is I can copy this domain. So I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to bring up URL scan.io. And the reason why I'm doing this is I want to give you a way to do it yourself. We have it in the back end, and I'll show you that we can actually show that image, show that query, and show what it looks like. I have one for a Wells Fargo fish that if we have enough time, I'll get into that. But I wanted you to see that, okay? So I'm going to open a tab to the right, and I'm going to go to URL scan.io, okay? Now, instead of me running it where it's going to go to the website today, I'm going to first look to see if there was anything in the past. So I'm going to go to search, okay? And the reason why is sometimes it might not have been seen right now. It might be offline, but I want to see if anybody submitted one that could be there. So from 8 days ago, there was some stuff here. So if I open that up in another tab, I'm going to the second one on the list. I can say, hey, it's been malicious, and it was somebody in New Zealand or Australia. And I can actually see an image of what it looked like when you went to the website. So yeah, this is PayPal phishing, but I can now analyze, all of the requests, how it's going, what's happening with it. But it gives me the capability now to do some extra searching. So because these are using images that are stored directly on that website, and it's not pulling the images directly from PayPal, this one's a little bit different. They're trying to hide. A lot of these threat actors now, because of dynamic content that happens on a real company's website, they want to make sure that they're pulling the images and pulling the things directly from the people that they're attacking. So as the real website updates, their images update in real time as well from the real source. It's not happening in this particular case, but there's an image that's here. And if I expand this out and I right click on the hash, so the hash is like what that file, it's a number that represents the file, and it is exact match. So if you change something in the file, the hash will change. So if I right click on this one and open another tab, this is now going to search the world and show me all of the other places in the world that use that same image. And if you can see here, there's PayPal sign in, but there's this other one happened 52 minutes ago. And if I right click and open that up in another tab, that gives me another one that's malicious. That's right now, active right now. So it gives me the capability to come in here and say, well, this was the, this is the domain. So if I take this and I copy it and I go back to RiskIQ, so what I'm going to do is open a tab to the right, go into community.riskiq.net. Sorry about that. It had a cached one. So from here, I'm going to search for this. Okay, and I can see if there's any information. It's probably something that was just stood up. And now I can look at the host pairs and I can see, hey, there's images sourcing from PayPal objects. Okay, so they're actually pulling the images directly from PayPal objects. And there it is. That's that direct tie-in. Okay, and it hasn't been blocked yet. Okay, so this gives me that capability of going from something that is a known good, finding some things that are potentially bad, then leveraging what we find of those bad things to find more bad things that are even active. So if your supply chain relies upon a third party, so if you're doing, we're doing Magento, we're doing PayPal, you're doing your bank, whatever it is, right? It's a way for you to go look to verify that they're doing okay or know about these things, to find those active things that are occurring.
And I mean, when you think about it, like we all use these different payment processors.
Right.
And so it can be, and in this particular case, it's PayPal, but it could be any number of these different process-oriented suppliers, right? Where it's a functional, that's a functional aspect of the business that has been used by a supplier. It may not necessarily be a raw good. And so, or a physical service, like, everybody talks about the casino that was hacked because its aquarium cleaning service came in and connected into its smart thermometer and that kind of thing. But
right,
be an entirely digital service category of the payment process that's happening in this capacity, and that's just a relationship you don't think about. And if they're the ones that are being hit, but it's even being hit from them outward, but it is that toehold that can snake its way into affecting you. I really, it's interesting how like one particular page, is drawing from another, and then just these layers of obfuscation that can prevent someone from being seen. So that probably took you a little time to kind of dig around and sift through.
Yes, yeah, it did. And so what I'm doing here is I went through, remember I opened up that IP address and I said, hey, is there anything else that's bad there? So on that first one that we opened, I right-clicked on that IP and said, show me that, maybe we can look for a campaign. And I see one that was blocked. This was on the 16th. So I'm looking to see if there was anybody was using that. So an hour ago, somebody submitted something, but there was something from, let's see if there's anything 7 days ago. So let's look at the one from an hour ago and let's take a look. So this one shows that's not the full website. So let's go back and let me see if I can find one from a few days ago. Yeah, this one doesn't show it, but it was blocked. So there was something that Google Safe Browsing blocked it. So somebody submitted it to Google and they figured out it was bad and they blocked it. So that IP address is serving up some bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably related to the same threat actor. Here's, so that's something to bear in mind when we go through and look at those. But the same technique will work for the mail confirm unverified that we just did. So if I copy this, and let's go out and we can search for it. From 6 days ago, I can open this up in another tab. And this one now it's not responding back, but I can go back further. 8 days ago, let's see. There it is, and there's PayPal. And I can look at the information. I can see that particular file name. I can look for that particular file. I can look to see all of the other ones that are using it. So it gives me that capability to go back and leverage the knowledge that you're going to gain from your investigation to find more bad that you can then go back into, illuminate and link that together and get more infrastructure and expand it out further and further. But PayPal is attacked all the time because if you're the big one on the block, everyone's going to try to poke you and steal from you. And that's what happens.
Bingo. Okay. Really, I mean, I don't want to say exciting, but it can be kind of exciting.
It's scary too,
Yeah, it's excited, scary, not excited, happy.
Yeah.
All right.
So now we're up to ransomware, and if we have an additional time, I actually was sent a Wells Fargo phish, so I went through and I did that as well. So it all depends on how much time we have after this one.
The Wells Fargo Stagecoach.
Yeah.
So it's like a fish with like reins. Anyway, sorry. Just when you said a Wells Fargo fish, like that's what I thought of. I thought of Charlie the tuna on a sun-kissed tuna can, holding the reins of a Wells Fargo coach. Sorry, everyone. Real quick, I know that some of you folks have been holding on to find out who was the winner of the Amazon gift card. We're going to get to that in just a bit. But however, other question is, how do I get my swag for the education credits and so forth? So before we get into this ransomware, which is kind of a fun one that like I was telling you, I'm going to go dig around in this group and see what else I can find out. So went traipsing around in this particular ransomware group. But before we get there, can you let the folks know how they'll get a badge and all of that, Benjamin?
So when we're done today, we have your email address, and we're going to email you a Credly badge. And the Credly badge gives you the capability of going to Credly, you create an account. It then will allow you to access your CPE credits. And if you print it, it prints out an actual certificate. And then you can also, if you want, put it on LinkedIn or your social media and show that you've acquired these real experience credits for doing threat investigation. So this is like the live fire range where you're getting real world experience investigating threats. And what we're trying to do is to train your eyes and brain that you've seen these before, like that employee that's been at the organization forever, that when an issue happens, you all turn to him or her and say, okay, what do we do? You've seen this before. And then they say, well, yeah, I saw that 3 years ago, and this is what we did. And this is the direction we should take for the investigation. That's what I'm trying to give you now, is that experience that when you go into battle, you can immediately start using these things and understanding the adversary and understand the full extent of that attack.
True story. So that's it's also a good way to share with others what you learned, because one of the things we're going to do as well is give you all the contents from today. And another thing too, we mentioned that we're going to burn down the lab. That's a metaphorical reference. There's no arson going on here, but we will like dismantle the lab access after we're done. But you can do, which if you're going to share with peers is even better. You can get the trial and keep it going, which will then actually be your own attack surface. You won't be living inside of Swatch. It'll be your own. And then that's an even more applicable way to show your colleagues and peers exactly how to do things in your context, which most of the time helps it stick more, on top of the fact that you can show off your Credly badge. We do have a winner of the Amazon gift card, Rahul K. Rahul K. You know who you are. We value anonymity here, so we're not going to say your last name, Rahul. But if you can raise hand or chat back that you're still here, have to be present to win or whatnot. And then Barrett, do you want to unmute yourself and chime in on how Rahul will receive what he's won?
He has his hand up. He's excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Congrats, Rahul. I'll be reaching out to you directly this afternoon.
Okay. So that was the whole like word from our sponsors moment. So very quickly, we all know how ransomware works, but if you don't, we have graphics. So there's of course the initial ingress that occurs, compromise happens, and then we start to tunnel around and burrow into the systems, and eventually get to a point where we can nestle in and reach, beacon out to C2. Now, the important thing about ransomware, especially this particular one we're talking about today, is the Trojan payload delivery. So what traditionally happens, of course, when you have an executable and it runs, many times that you can stop that from occurring in the first place. The trouble is that this particular Trojan, called iced ID, has a persistence capability. And the persistence capability is mainly driven by its analysis of the current local system, in particular, ensuring that it's not running in a sandbox or a VM. There is also a very good cloaking mechanism whereby they're actually putting the payload in a PNG file. And so it can be very easily blended in with a whole lot of other files that seem relatively good. How many of us have gone to Google, searched for something, clicked the image results, and then downloaded a PNG? And how many times does it come across as just almost like a long hash, right? It doesn't necessarily have a particular naming convention all the time, but it's an image or icon that you wanted to get to send to a friend on your phone, in a text message or something, some funny image or whatever, cat memes. And so we're used to a .png file not necessarily having a traditional or consistent naming convention that would easily describe what the image is. And so what they do is they automatically generate that for you. In the IST-ID Trojan, being able to first ensure that it's not in an environment that can inspect it, and then second, being able to save its payload that it pulls down from the C2 after it's inspected the environment, and then blend in with the rest of the photos in the photos file on your Windows PC. And so very simple, clever way. It also speaks to the point that I mentioned when we opened, is the attacker psychology. These are human beings, and so they know how to think like other human beings and get around and anticipate the chess moves that we're going to make. And so they can understand user behavior and understand these commonalities that happen on the local machine, the way we save photos, the way we save files, and also the ways that we can inspect something that comes into our environment on that local device to know whether or not it is problematic. And so before they put anything malicious on the machine, during that initial compromise, burrowing, C2, and tunneling, no payload has even entered into the system yet. Not until there's a thorough inspection, usually for a couple of days, before they then deploy the ransomware payload. When that ransomware payload does come across, it's a PNG file, okay? And so it's not your common executable that you're used to seeing, your .exe or other file-based malware. At that point at which it then does generate the encryption, but not before an exfil. So initially there's going to be an exfil, and this is where this particular group, and you can go to the next slide, that's where they get their name. And it's the 1% group. And so what 1% group does is ransomware as a service. And they're currently being monitored very closely by the FBI, and a report was recently put out in late August about some discovery that was conducted to see how their behavior has been for several months. And what the federal authorities can say is that they can see attacks dating back all the way to November of last year. So they've been operating in the United States for almost a year underneath the banner of the 1% group. Why they call themselves that, and we don't know what nation state they're in, and we don't have an identifiable individual that we can single out, or group of individual human persons. Right now, just going under the banner of the 1% group. We do know that they're operating currently with Maze, Revil, and which of course are connected in with the Fin7 cyber criminal syndicate, which is of Russian origin. So the payload, as I mentioned, was they're using IST-ID, which was originally discovered by IBM. And it's a relatively old kind of Trojan. They've done a slight variant to it, but nothing super major except for that file save capability that it's injecting into the auto-generated name. That again is obscured by the fact that they're looking around at what you're naming your other photos to blend in. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of functional difference between this particular IST-ID and the original IST-ID Trojan. In particular, that's the mechanism they're choosing right now to deploy Cobalt Strike. So we all know about Cobalt Strike, right, Benjamin? We talk about it all the time. And so this is one of the ways that they're obscuring the fact that there's a compromise. And so first, they're doing a systems check continuously and in a persistence way by putting things in task scheduler, and also kicking off a process that generates at login and once an hour, and doing the sniffing around and then erasing itself if it observes or detects that it's inside a VM or a sandbox. It additionally has a little sniffer in case it detects any CrowdStrike sensors on there or an activation of Defender APT. ATP. Sorry, I'm used to saying APT all the time. So when it's advanced threat protection, ATP with Defender. So they have a couple of sniffers like that that can look for the signatures of those endpoint agents, even the particular like lightweight sensor from CrowdStrike. And so they'll remain dormant and hide out and even erase if need be, but they maintain the attack path addressing and so forth to return. And with the Trojan, they then use that primarily. There is as it says down there in the footnote, they've been seen using the Shad Hack and the Gold Cabin malware campaigns and piggybacking on that. But primarily right now, what the FBI is saying is that they're seeing them mostly using ICE IP. And that Trojan is then the mechanism by which Cobalt Strike enters the system, and that's where the lateral movement begins. And so, again, there's a write-up we have on Fin7, which is one of their contractors, the people that were, I guess they're a contractor for, one of those that they've been implicated in doing ransomware attacks on behalf of as a service for Fin7. In particular, if you go to the next slide, their method of the whole 1% thing is that they will show you the 1% of data that they've encrypted. So that as a way of a threat saying, we're not kidding, we already have this, and they do an exfil before they do the ransomware encryption. So that way they can turn around and use it again as a dangling threat and say, here it is, we have 1%, pay ransom via digital currency, as we mentioned earlier, the oxygen of the criminal economy. And then if you don't pay the ransom on time, they're going to sell the 1% off to Fin7, Reveal, Maze, and so on. What we are observing is some interactivity and connectivity with other threat groups. In particular, the one with Fin7, though, is of special note. I mean, Fin7 is rated over $1 billion during their operation. It's pretty significant. And so having that direct association and direct business relationship that they have, potentially 1% group is just a subsidiary type of thing from Fin7. Can't know for sure, but it does seem to have definitely a strong connection, and they own the fact that they do. This is a connected group that they're operating with. And if you don't pay the ransom in full, that's when they will auction off the entire data set and also persist the ransomware. So again, it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game right now, still tracking, still haven't been able to identify anyone or the nation state of which they're operating. But what we can say is that the primary groups that they're doing ransomware as a service for come out of the Russian Federation. So if we go from there, I know one of the things we're going to do is when things are obscure to us and we want to start mapping things and seeing where people are. So again, ransomware is a big concern that a lot of people, even on this workshop, have said. And in particular, when we're looking at groups, I mean, like today we published the spiderweb one, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, it's everywhere. And what's interesting to me when looking at 1% is that they've created a business model. That's the frightening thing to me, because it's a business model that can be easily copied by anybody. Ransomware is relatively cheap to create. It really is. It's not that difficult. The payload is the interesting part. The payload delivery system, and being able to use it with a Trojan, that also is relatively easy to change. I have up in front of me right now, I have 5 different GitHubs with open source Trojan code that I can easily fashion into my own Trojan, and then stuff that with ransomware that can be acquired by any ransomware as a service that were to pop up that could start making some noise. These guys have been most effective when it comes to their ability to deploy the attack, as well as obscure who it is that they're doing it for, and maintain some level of anonymity, even from federal authorities, NSA, CISA, FBI, and so on. That's the interesting thing to me, though, is that they've created a business model that others can emulate. And so anyway, we do see ransomware anywhere, everywhere.
Yeah, and I guess there's some questions that came in about cryptojacking. So if they're sometimes some of these attacks will watch for when you put in your cryptocurrency credentials, so then they can steal your cryptocurrency. That's different than ransomware. The ransomware that we're talking about is they're exfiltrating your data and encrypting the data that's left behind. So you have to pay to unencrypt it or erase and go from backup.
Yeah, they're not doing any cryptojacking. They're not doing any mining either, where they're enslaving your GPU to bang out Monero or Bitcoin or anything. They're not doing any of that stuff. Not doing the enslavement that we do see sometimes. It's not that kind of ransom. It's a true ransom. It's a gun to your head. I have your stuff. It's hostage. Pay me.
Or I'm going to give it away to people that will do bad with it, or hurt you, and you'll have a GDPR nightmare that you have to deal with, or something.
A GDPR nightmare you have to deal with, and who they're going to hand it to is Fin7.
Yeah,
the one that they continue to say that that's who they're auctioning off with. But they've created a proof of concept for a business model for ransomware as a service. Again, I mean, for goodness sake, it's hard to keep things secure with software as a service in our world, right? So knowing that there are these kinds of models popping up is something we want to keep an eye on, but it's also one of the reasons that you have to track relationships, because it's in that relationship, that internet graph, that will identify where these things are really going on, and the connectivity and the relationships that are hidden most of the time, because we look at things on the internet as like individual objects most of the time, instead of looking at the relationship between all of these individual entities. But you were going to say something more about, and then of course, the spiderweb stuff that we published today.
Yeah. So I was going to, because we're running low on time, I wanted to get to the next piece. But what I did was I just searched for ransomware, and then the article that I based this map upon was the 1% group piece here. And inside of here, we had some public indicators that were given by the FBI, and then some RiskIQ indicators that we found with our own Team Atlas doing some investigating. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you something that I created, because people will always ask, hey, how can I visualize this? How can I understand what's happening? So while this is going, I'll talk, and it's about a 2-minute video. So I used a program called Maltego. And what I did was I took those indicators, and you'll see I sped this up 3.5 times. And I copied those indicators just from the article. And I used RiskIQ data, hybrid analysis, proof point, and also CrowdStrike information to look at those IPs and domains and try to figure out the attribution and linkage and what was there. So I have the map, and I'll show you that map in a second, but I wanted to show you how you can visualize the data, because when you build those infrastructure chains, they can get pretty long.
They do.
And once you go 2 or 3 levels deep, it's kind of hard to figure out what's really there. So I'm a visual person, so I like to figure out all the pieces and components. So when I built this map, there was a sinkhole address that Amazon used, and so I took that out because that could give some false readings with tie-ins with other groups. So I removed it once it was done. And then there was a 0.0.0.0 address that was put in there as well that I removed. So the map became a little bit different, but it's really important to understand this. So what I did was I looked at the passive DNS for the domains and IPs, got those. And then I looked at the malware that RiskIQ knew that was associated with those IPs and domains. And then I used CrowdStrike data to look to see if there were any attribution to those groups, and then add additional indicators from domains and IPs that CrowdStrike knew that were related to those. And that's what I'm building right here. And so every one of those little dings that you hear is an API query, because this is using the RiskIQ API. So it's pretty intensive for doing some of these queries, but you do get a map that shows all the linkages and all that information. And I think this is almost done. We have another maybe 20 seconds. And then I'll go into and show you the actual map. And then we can look at it and understand it.
Kind of like the cooking show. We're kind of showing you all the ingredients we put together.
Correct.
And then back for commercial break. And then there's the baked cake. But
the first time I did this, it took me quite a bit of time to actually build this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up two different ones. Okay, so here's the actual map. So if we take a look, here's the RiskIQ 1% group, how we linked it together to the IPs and domains that we see here. But as we go through, you can see that, hey, this is where the Cobalt Strike was living, those areas. As we come over here, these are the hybrid analysis pieces, that the hashes that they saw that people submitted. Over here is the proof point hashes that were put in. You can see Maze and egregor in here. If we take a look over here, I even saw a tie-in with Tofsy connected to it from the hashes for the malware that was coming in. And then if we come up to here, there's a banking Trojan and Lunar Spider connected to the same infrastructure. So from those indicators that we initially looked from, and expanding those out and taking out the sinkhole address and taking out those others, this is the map that was created for this threat actor, showing all of the hashes that were seen by 3 different vendors, and linking those together to give a full, complete picture of the attack surface of this infrastructure that they're leveraging.
Yeah.
So when I left that sinkhole address in, it became huge. And you can see here, plug X, solar maker stealer, all of these other threat actors were tied in. Okay. And it's because the sinkhole address was an Amazon sinkhole. It's not like they have one for every one that they do. They have one single one that they're jumping stuff to. So when I first did the map, I looked at this and said, wow, look at this. And then I went back and I said, oh, let me look at this again. Let me see why it became so big and so many different threat actors were in here. And it was because of that sinkhole address that was in here. But this is the map of just that infrastructure, taking out those other components that would give false positives.
yeah, and so that was a whole lot thrown at you guys at once there. But one of the things that keeps coming up is ransomware, and then the insider threat like today did. That's exactly how 1% hits you. 1% is known for social engineering. Hi, it's Pete from college. Hey, do you mind if I send you my resume? I wanted to see if maybe you can help me get an interview at your organization. Oh yeah, sure, Pete, I remember you. You know, it's easy to fake that.
Right.
We can really spin something up like that in an afternoon. And then you open up the Word file. There is a prompt that says to update, or that it's password protected. You email Pete back, and then Pete gives you the password, which is ever changing, too, that we see in their behavior. And then it downloads the iStudy Trojan, which again remains dormant and doesn't do any beaconing until there are a minimum of 6 task schedulers that are run, and it can confirm that it's not sandbox, not VM'd. And then at that point, it will, the C2, it will send those results back to the C2. And then that remote operator will determine what payloads get sent back into iStudy Trojan. And one of the ones that they do in particular is, of course, the ransomware we just described. But in terms of the mapping, okay, next time, 2 weeks from now, tell your friends, we're going to show you some more mapping. And we're going to show you a lot of places where there are very solid lines between alliances and common infrastructure used by several. Again, it's the whole point. It's going from one threat actor to thousands to, well, we won't show you thousands, but in terms of the infrastructure capability to service thousands, it's there. And we're going to go ripping through a lot of threat infrastructure that is supposed to be bulletproof. But we're going to show how we can get into it. And even if we can't take it down, even if we can't disable the services, we can rummage around in there and find who's operating it and what they're up to.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned the untangling the spider web, the wizard spider thing that we put out yesterday. So there was a 0-day exploit with Microsoft. Microsoft found a vulnerability on the 7th. On the 8th, I guess there was a proof of concept attack that was out there, but they, our threat investigator, our team Atlas, what they did was they looked at that payload and saw what it was doing and how it was beaconing back. And they found a couple hundred command and control servers there. So they worked with Microsoft's Mystic team, which was working from the end user perspective and looking at data there and how it works and how it was detonated and what happened. And our global visibility, we teamed up and wrote an article where they wrote their piece, they linked to us, we wrote our piece on our data and linked to them. And what's really nice about that is that generally when you're in the organization doing the investigation, doing stuff, the visibility that you have is only what you've collected and what you've seen. And so it's a different perspective. So now from the global perspective, now you can tie it together to say, hey, I can go through and for these 2,000 public indicators, if I block them all, it's going to prevent this threat actor from coming in and getting into my organization to begin with. So it's a way of protecting you and not just with the software that could find it when it detonates, it's preventing the detonation from occurring at all.
Yeah. So we have taken everybody to time. Everybody's going to get their Credly badges. Do you want to show people how to extend it with the, because we're going to burn in the lab here in just a sec. Do you want to go to the, yeah.
I did. I sent out the, it should be in there. Let me make sure.
We'll put the link in the chat.
Yeah, I think I just did, but it didn't take. So hold on.
community.riskiq.com/learn-more. And then when you're there, there's going to be a little orange button on the right and it says trial. And so you can do that and you can keep doing all of these things. We're going to send out the information. We're going to send out the slides. There's going to be a recording. Again, invite your friends. They can get into the same exercises. You can redo them, rewatch them. You can go to the YouTube channel and see more of them from past workshops. So that's how you keep the fun going, because the lab's about to get blown up and we'll eliminate access to it. But very happy everybody's here. And I can't tell you enough, be here next time, because that's when we're going to really explode the map out. We're going to show you all their naughty infrastructure, where they're hiding and what toys they're playing with, and how to unmask them and defeat them, because this is a war for the internet and we're going to make it safe.
Yeah. So the things that we're trying to show you is to train you again, to give you real experience, to find and eliminate the threats that are in your supply chain and in your organizations. Now that you have to think globally, it's beyond what you have to see and control and what you have control over, but you might have influence over others to make a change. And that's what we're trying to give you, is that information that if you call a third party that you're monitoring and say, I see you have this problem, they can go and create a trial of Illuminate and see those same results themselves. So it gives you the capability of have apples to apples comparison and to be able to do that. So we want to make sure that you're aware of that.
Thanks everybody. Very kind comments as well. We'll see you next time. And again, together we will make the internet a safe place for everyone. That's what we're going to do. And you're a part of it too. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.